So for a long time, people have just accepted that if you want to get an international regulatory clearance with your device, you have to spend $20,000 to $50,000, right? And like nobody really questioned it, it seemed like. But I met Rhys Williams and I had to bring him on the pod. He's the co-founder of Orchestrate, a Reg-Tech platform helping medtech companies turn regulation into a growth lever instead of a barrier. Rhys has a PhD from UCL in medical physics, spent time at Meta as a product manager building automations, and he ran a Pan-African medtech accelerator out of Kenya, which was super cool. In this conversation, he demos his Orchestrate platform and generates a full international regulatory submission in seconds. He walks through why he's building an AI-native QMS from scratch and breaks down why the banking industry shift from paper-based processes to instant transfers is the technology playbook that medtech should follow. So if international device clearances is in your future or you're going through it now, this episode is packed with stuff that you're going to be able to use immediately. We talk about AI, where it's going, how he sees being an AI native organization impacting how he hires and how he grows the business. You don't want to miss this one, so stick around for the whole thing. I know you're going to love it. Rhys Williams, so excited to have you on the pod. I feel like I say this a lot, but this may be one of my episodes that I'm like most excited about to have you on. So yeah, thanks for coming on. Where does this podcast find you today?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. So I'm joining you from London. Thankfully, we've just broken the spell of, I think, every day raining for the last, 2 months, but really, really glad to be here. Looking forward to kind of sharing what we're working on at Orchestrate, a little bit about my background. And then also, I think it'd be really fun, especially given your background as well, to share where I see things going, both from an aspirational and maybe a pragmatic point of view as well.
Yeah, no, we have to get into that because I'm really, really curious to get your thoughts on it. So, and just kind of as high level getting things started, Rhys is co-founder of Orchestrate, which we're going to dive deeply into, but it's a platform built for teams working in regulated industries like Medtech. And I think I saw RegTech on, I think your LinkedIn profile, seems simple. I just like that a lot. And I do want to ask you about the whole RegTech piece of it as well. But yeah, so he holds a PhD from the University College of London. You won the London Health Tech Challenge not that long ago, 10,000 pound prize.
Yeah.
You've had your hand in actual device companies and wearables, right? And then you've also you're almost kind of working more on the tools and things for other device operators, which I just find is really fascinating. But you work for Ford, Amazon, RBS, and Meta. You did, advertising automation stuff for Meta for a while, which is just crazy interesting. But maybe I'll just lead that in. I know, trying to give the audience a little bit of an intro, but would love to hear it from the horse's mouth, right? Just tell us about how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, sure. So, funnily enough, I always say that I started off as a medical physicist. So that was medical physics and sort of imaging was my first sort of true love. And really, whilst working at UCL, I was very lucky to be able to work in some spin outs at the university. And there I would say really started to fall in love with the kind of product mindset of hey, let's take some really kick-ass physics and try and do something translational with it. So for me, it was early on really kind of getting that exposure to let's make some products, let's actually change something, let's do something impactful in health. But really throughout my career, it's kind of evolved from medical physics to medical devices. My PhD was in more prosthetic side of things, kind of trying to explore that messy world of rather than just putting sensors on people, let's actually try and do the qualitative human factors understanding, really dive deep into the full service aspect. But it's been a really kind of a wild ride that I would sort of say every step that I sort of took in that moment didn't quite make sense. But now looking back, I'm able to sort of see that there's, quite a common thread between health, computer science, human computer interaction, biomed, all of that sort of stuff. But more than happy to as well, share some more sort of points of interest from my career. But as you said, it involves Meta, being a lecturer and running an accelerator in Kenya in Pan Africa.
I didn't know you ran an accelerator. That's awesome. I was the entrepreneur in residence for an accelerator, Medtech accelerator back in the day. But I credit, I don't know how much of an impact it had on you. If you've, participated in one as well as run one. But like looking back, people like, how'd you get started? I always get that question, right? Like whenever, because I
Yeah.
came from being a nurse to doing it. And I like every single time the answer is like, it was mainly accelerator programs. That's what gave me that dirt money, you know, that's like,
Yeah.
you know, before the seed money, you got to get the dirt money. Gave me that money. And then like a lot of the training and confidence. I'm curious, like how much, you know, did you participate in one early on before running it? How big of an impact did they have on you?
Yeah, so in terms of setting up the accelerator, so I was very, very lucky to work with a company called, or community interest company called the Global Disability Innovation Hub. And they're, you know, doing everything from grassroots community engagement with persons with disability to cutting edge frontier research to actual translational and innovation work. And I was more sort of on the innovation side of things, basically because it was a case of, hey, we need someone who understands entrepreneurship and has deep understanding of disability and medical devices and that sort of way
Yeah.
forward. And at least at that point in time, that would have been, you know, about 2020 or so. The Venn diagram of those people was quite small.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But really, what we were able to do is working with an incredible guy called Bernard Chira, who's based out in Kenya. He's the director of the accelerator. I sort of came on board to try and like, let's formalize it. Let's kind of get the curriculum. Let's make sure that, you know, our partnerships, our data gathering, everything end to end is working. And like, for me, it was a case of a really useful experience to kind of put together an accelerator program, because I had to sit there and think, right, what is important? You know, what things do companies have to actually know to commercialize? And I would say it's been a real privilege actually as well to be involved with so many different types of companies, you know, class 1 to class 2 to, you know, companies that are software to, you know, powered wheelchairs, all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. So I want to ask you kind of some questions about kind of like how you got to, you know, kind of the decision to build, to launch Orchestrate. But I don't
Yeah.
think we can do that without you telling people kind of what it is and who it's for. So like kind of floor is yours. Give us the elevator pitch on Orchestrate.
Nice, thank you. So Orchestrate, what we're doing is basically building a platform and services that helps any medtech company to actually remain compliant. But we would say that we specialize in software that does easy expansion into new markets, easy expansion of your product portfolio, really trying to kind of put regulation at the forefront of your company's growth so that, you know, regs don't have to be a barrier. And, you know, we're looking forward to kind of being able to show a bit of how we do that.
Yeah.
But I would say the main thing really is we're trying to make it so that regs aren't a barrier to commercialization.
No, that's really important. I mean, I've been on the, you know, device operator side where you get your 510K or you get your de novo clearance, and it's like, well, like we can really only bite off one international regulatory clearance almost like per year sometimes. You know what I mean? Or like maybe you can hit like 2 very small countries that, you know, it's really not. But like the big ones, like especially like EU MDR, like a lot of those you're just not going to go after it because it's just too big of a lift currently.
Yeah.
So maybe that's my anecdotal experience, right? How are you seeing people currently, device teams, right, like solving this problem? Like how are they approaching, you know, regulatory clearances, international markets and stuff like that, and kind of as a lead into like how you guys do it differently?
Yeah, so I think when we were starting to explore this problem space and, you know, I was sort of coming back to this and thinking, hey, I know that there's a ton of work that needs to be done in medtech to help actually enable innovation. We were speaking with lots of different companies, and I can remember one company saying that it's just like taken for granted that every medtech company is sort of told you need to allocate like, I don't know, $20,000 to $50,000 minimum to even kind of get clarity on which direction you should be heading.
Yeah.
And for me, that's just one of those problems where the moment that I hear it's taken for granted and you just have to accept it, I'm sort of like, okay, but why is that? Like, let's really dig in. And like you dig into that and you start to understand that, you know, oftentimes it's because, you know, the expertise is very expensive, usually operates on a per hourly basis. And the big thing that I would say is, you know, I don't want to sound like I'm knocking regulatory affairs consultants because they do awesome work. It's really an essential part of the product development process. But I think for companies that are really trying to navigate that early stage, when it's a kind of a case of, hey, your legal bills and patent bills are stacking up, your clinical data gathering is stacking up, your manufacturing needs, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Oh, and by the way, you've also got to find this amount of money.
Yeah.
It's really that thing where it becomes a bit intractable. And so often we hear that, companies leave regs a lot later than they should. And then all of a sudden, they make mistakes like, oh, well, we've collected our data, but we've actually got this gap in XYZ, demographics or something like that.
Yeah.
And that's a very expensive mistake to find, that when you're prepping your submissions and everything, that you need to then go back to data collection.
100%. And just two quick thoughts. Like, yeah, I think some people think that like the majority of the cost and frankly time, but cost really, getting an international regulatory clearance is like some fee that the government or notified body or whatever charges you. And like usually there is a fee, but like it's like de minimis compared to the rest of the cost of like just the time and the hours and the labor that go into it with like kind of the I would say current or old way of doing it. And then the second thought I was going to say is like, there seems to be two like almost omnipresent forces here around the why things were like, why we just needed to accept it, why things were. I think one is like on one side of this equation of regs, right? It's who's the regulatory, it's a government body in some way, shape or form, right? Or an agency of the government, et cetera. So like, as we know, like they can be, governments can be slow to adopt technologies or streamline things. It can be a very manual process. Everybody understands that. And then on the flip side, though, like I think for whatever reason, I personally believe this about Medtech broadly, but like the regulatory and quality people like are still very paper-based. They do things in a very paper-based way, right? So you've kind of got these two forces of like, you're dealing with government, it's slow, it's manual. They often want you to just have a paper-based thing. And then these people that are just like already used to having kind of slow manual paper-based processes, et cetera. And like, that's how you get these like crazy long timelines and costs, right?
Yeah. And I think the great irony is like, when we speak with reg affairs professionals, I think maybe there's almost like I think the sector gets a bit of a bad rep in that it's, holding on to these paper-based systems because they're infatuated with it. I'm yet to meet a reg affairs professional who is in love with doing all the admin work, who is in love with, sticking to the paper stuff. It's really, you've got to kind of understand that there's a reason why those methods are still around. And that's because generally it works, it's robust, it bridges quite well for auditing needs, safety requirements. And, in a way, having some degree of friction isn't always a bad thing in a product development process. So that's something that I think is often taken for granted. That being said, we can definitely do better.
Yeah, and to me, it's kind of like I'm thinking of like you have your local like a local Word doc file, right? Like it's not connected to anything. There's no sharing. That's one version of a paper-based. And then you have your Teams or your Google Doc, right? Where you're sharing it and it's still a collaborative file.
Yeah.
And there's rev history, right? That's still paper-based, but it is a step in the right direction. So there's levels to it, right? There's degrees to this thing. And I really like the point that you said about like some friction is good. I think more people, especially that are on kind of like the AI curious side of, well, I just want to automate this and this and this and this and this. And it's like, okay, stop. Like the friction is there.
Yeah.
The human in the loop steps have to happen. Like these are good things, and quality, you can't really sacrifice it on that side. So, I feel like the people who are probably watching, they're like, can you just show me what it is? So if you want to get the demo teed up for us, and you can start sharing whenever. I'll keep yapping. Are you ready now? Are you good?
Yeah, sure. Why not? Let's give it a go. So just before I do share, what I'll say is, one of the key things that we want to ensure is that with Orchestrate, we're actually able to meet companies where they are, meet employees where they are, because I think everyone has, heard that software XYZ is going to change the world, blah, 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 blah. And then you have to learn it. You've got another surface that you have to go to. And, lo and behold, people don't use it or it's used not in the way that it's intended to.
No, I hear there's a Nate B. Jones. He's one of my favorite people on YouTube that talks about this stuff. He opines frequently about the interaction surface and the interaction layer. And when he was talking about Claude Code or Claude Cowork, that was one of the things that he thought was kind of like a differentiating factor that was like fundamentally different, right? Than web-based stuff that's not operating at a local level, interacting with your files like that. So like the interaction surface, meeting people where they are, I think specifically for medtech, that is couldn't be more valuable, you know?
And the big thing that I would say is, especially when we consider, quality processes, really the thing of the moment people have to be broken out of how they are actually working to follow an SOP or, do some sort of kind of a little bit unnatural process, that's when actually you find that people start deviating from the process or doing hackarounds or having local versions that deviate. And, it's not like anyone necessarily does that sort of stuff out of malice. It's just because, oh, well, for me to do this like the formal way, I've got to completely pause, stop, readjust everything. So just with that in mind, as I say, we're building Orchestrate really to show up in the tools that you already use. So this is deep integration with Microsoft Office. So that's Word, SharePoint, Teams, all of those sort of things, Outlook, as well as showing up in, if you're in the Google Suite, in those sort of things. The reason being is because, let's be honest, the work doesn't happen. No one's kind of opening a dedicated like QMS doc editor to, create their specific stuff. Or at least if they are, it's just one person in the teams then having to go around and gather all the stuff and copy and paste. And it's just, I'll just share the screen. So really, here's an example of how we can show up as Orchestrate within Google Docs. So with our software, you have, as I said, a deep integration. Let's imagine that you've already got some certification or documentation in a product portfolio, and you're looking to expand into a different market. Here, what we can do is look up the documentation, and what our system does is it takes your unstructured documents, breaks them down and parses them into chunks that can then be appropriately reused. And then say, so here, we can see that we've got our FDA, EU MDR, TGA, etc. And if we were wanting to go into like, I don't know, a new market like Saudi, what we can do is we can analyze what we already have and what we are, where we're wanting to go, and see very clearly, hey, here are all the things that you can reuse. And actually, you're nearly most of the way there to launch in this market, at least from a regs perspective. The things that you're going to need to do, though, would be like, you've got to generate your localization for your labeling, and those sort of things that, can be kind of exported. But what we're able to do here is actually generate that submission by reusing the documentation that you already have. And so what would have taken, hours to actually prep, we're able to generate in a matter of clicks.
It almost happened so fast. It just want to make sure the audience, you would have missed it. But like he clicks that, and like before he can like go to close the window, what was zero text, zero on the page, no pages, right? Now there's 16 pages here to this document. It's just this gorgeously organized. So I have this is incredible. And feel free to scroll through some of that, whatever, if you want. But I have some questions.
Yeah,
I'll do like a technical question first, and then like the medtech question. Actually, I'll flip that. I'll do the medtech one first.
Sure.
So when you say you can upload your documents, right? So is this like basically your FDA submission, a design history file? Like what in your mind is kind of the ideal set of documents for your device and existing submissions?
So we've actually got two ways, and I'll kind of give a bit of a sneak peek of something that we're working on. So we've got two ways of operating. You can either integrate with your existing EQMS, or you can use us just as a drag and drop store and we can parse things, or we are actually developing our own native QMS solution.
No way. That's awesome.
Yeah.
We talked about this like a couple weeks ago, and the fact that you guys have built and shipped it, and I'm sure you were working on it a little bit then, but that's so awesome. Tell me more. Yeah.
So one of the things that we've done is really go back to the basics of like looking at what you need for a QMS. And I think, I understand why lots of the QMS platforms have, layered on feature on feature on feature. And that totally makes sense. But if you're starting from the principle of like, what if we completely reimagine what a QMS needs to be, really having like a document store with change management, like all of your kind of signature and approval processes, like we're able to kind of build up from there, and then using the surfaces like Google Docs, Word, Teams as the actual deep integrated workflows and places where you're actually implementing the quality system. So here, say, for example, we've got our docs and records. We're able to kind of ensure that these are all either tracked or untracked, and formal management processes. And if you're a company that's starting with your QMS journey for the first time, we're able to one-click generate the documentation and work with you to edit it so that it's right for your company. And most importantly, for this thing of some friction is good, we need you need to be able to stand behind that documentation. So we want to kind of co-author that with you, so that you're not spending weeks on it, but equally you're able to know that the content you have there is ironclad. But the thing that I would sort of say is what we're able to do as well is actually say for a specific product portfolio, the regions that you're in, we're able to automatically have specific workflows that are continuously acting. So say, for example, you make a change to one of the documents, it automatically triggers the change management process, review, approval. And, I'll just briefly show it here. This page is a bit messy, but we're still kind of figuring this out. But we can basically define exactly what these recipes are so that, you can kind of sit there and think, I'm quite confident that we've got our, workflow and product development side of things. We've got our automated stuff that's, working nicely. And we can have, per custom, either by product, region, or per company, things that actually matter for your company. And the big thing is, I know that probably lots of people are hearing something like this and they're thinking, what happens when the auditor arrives? And this is where, we're able to set up specific auditor accounts. We've got this full immutable log of everything that happened to to your documentation and key actions. So everything from CAPAs to, all of that stuff. But I'll stop sharing my screen there just to sort of say the reason that we've built this is, in a way, the QMS surface that I've just shown there is really kind of as a thing of, hey, if you don't have one or you're looking to kind of simplify something and deeply integrate quality in everything that you do, we've got a solution for that. But really the cool thing is it sounds a bit counterintuitive, but we're building this product so that you kind of don't have to use it.
Yeah.
This kind of curates everything and makes it so that, when you're in Teams, when you're in Outlook, this can actually deeply connect and pull stuff. But so that's a flavor.
Yeah, that's so awesome. I told you when we talked, it was probably a month ago maybe, but I was like, man, somebody's got to build like an AI-native QMS. I was like, and then I was talking to you, I was like, I mean, you guys are the people to do it. Frankly, I remember I was like, I'm not the person to do it necessarily, but I'm so glad you guys did. And so, yeah, that was one of my other questions was going to be the interaction surface remains the same. So it's still in their Teams and their Google Docs and their whatever. That makes total sense though. On kind of like those documents and that, repo, if you will, is going to feed into kind of that, we'll call it the international orchestrate, element there, right? That's fantastic. So I'm curious. I want to ask like how you guys got to this point before I just like dive in on like, I forgot to ask the technical question. I'm going to ask.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
So, so it very elegantly appears in the Google Doc, right? In the little orchestrate there, right? In the kind of the toolbar. So is this, and forgive me because I'm not a developer, but like, is it more of an extension, right? You're downloading and installing this extension like a plugin, and then it operates out of that? Or is it something more kind of deeply integrated or something in between that I'm just, missing?
Yeah. So if you imagine almost like you've got your back-end orchestrate system that, that does its own thing. And really it's just having the connections to plug into like your Office 365 add-ons.
Yeah.
And we're able to operate and exist within the Microsoft add-on system. So, I can imagine people hearing, the phrase integration. I know that probably like there's IT experts around the world just going, oh God, no, please.
Yeah.
And so this is also another thing where it's like, we want to ensure that, the actual integration surface is as easy as possible, just literally going into your add-ins and then logging in as if you would, whether this was like, I don't know, I'm not as familiar with add-ins as I should be.
Yeah.
But whether it's like Mendeley or a reference manager or something like that, we want to basically be able to show up the same. And obviously, we take, secure development incredibly seriously. It's essential to our company.
Yeah.
We know that the sort of context of information we're dealing with is proprietary and sensitive. So, we obviously do all of our pen testing and developing to, the appropriate standards. But really, long way of me saying, technically, the integration point is as easy as possible.
Yeah.
And really, I would say it's the system behind that we kind of do all the heavy lifting on so that you don't have to worry about that.
And I was thinking, we built a HubSpot integration for campaigns recently, right? We were looking at doing one for Dynamics 365 and Salesforce, and have looked at some of those other things. And like HubSpots, you kind of create your own custom app, and it like kind of lives in that HubSpot, arena, almost as a middleman between your tool data, you're kind of like your web app, if you will, and then like the client side HubSpot instance, right? And so like they made that really easy. It sounds very similar to the add-ons, and I know Google has like their extensions and things like that. So yeah, I say all that just to say this, for the people that are like, oh, like, integration, and it's like a big scary word or something like that, like they really, and I'm sure different tool providers are different, but like, at least from what I've seen, like they have made it pretty easy to like do this stuff now. And of course, if it's more of an AI native organization, like with the MCPs and all of this stuff, like it really is like much, much easier than it used to be to have these add-ons or these integrations or these extensions and things like that. So, okay, that was my technical question. And I'm going to have more for you like later, like off the pod, because I'm like the way it lays in there, and then like the modal pop-up that's still doing a lot of work, but it's like very clean. I'm just very interested in kind of technically the dev side on that stuff. But okay, so I want to explore a little bit, the jump off point for you being like, I want to do this RegTech thing, right? And because I feel like a lot of your traditional San Francisco, and I know you're not from Francisco, but I'm just saying like the VC type where it's like, I want to build a unicorn. I want to build the next Uber for dogs. I'm going to build a open Claude bot that's going to do X, Y, Z, whatever. Like they want to be these, unicorn companies, and like a regulated industry like that is not going to be as enticing to them. But like, what was the jump off point? Do you see it as greenfield because others are neglecting it? Like, I'm just curious how that jumped off and what the impetus was for you.
Yeah, so I've been quite lucky that throughout my career, I've worked with people that have been, I would say, system thinkers and service designers. And when you take that lens of looking through problems, I think it's amazing and exciting and super fun to be able to sort of look at Medtech and think of, oh, well, what are the most exciting ways in which we can innovate the science and the products? But equally from that, earlier I mentioned about the importance of things being translational. How do we get that into the real world? And obviously it's cutting edge science. That's great. But a lot of the time it's having a sustainable business model, having a way to finance things, knowing who the payer is, knowing the reimbursement pathways, figuring out your logistics, all of these sort of things that are as important in terms of the building blocks of a good company and actually getting innovation to, in the hands of patients or users. And that's where I sort of, looking at this is I really sort of think I can build an innovative med product, or I can accelerate all med products. And that's really kind of the way in which I looked at this. And really, I'll be honest, there's a degree of having to kind of look at what I know. I don't know logistics. I don't know distribution. And if anyone's watching this who does, let's have a conversation. We're always looking to connect with partners for seamless handoffs. But really, it's, in terms of the stuff that I know about, I think this really was the right area. And, when you look at the areas of like clinical trials and CROs, I think that's an area that receives a lot of attention. Whereas I think regs, and we're starting to see some exciting competition, heat up. So you've got things like Scala, an AI first notified body, which is incredible, like as a concept.
I've got to look that up. I haven't even seen that.
Yeah, you need to have a look. But that's the sort of thing where, we're starting to see some change and people starting to wake up. And it's that thing of, okay, if not me, then who? Because someone's going to do it.
Yeah.
why not me?
Yeah, I've always said I feel like so much of that, by the way, is like very much like underpins the thesis of why we're doing the stuff we're doing with Exo Medtech and Medtech vendors and campaigns and all of that. I've always said that it feels like Medtech has a ton of really amazing ideas and like incredibly talented clinicians and then mechanical engineers, but like what we're missing is like really, really skilled, highly trained operators, like with that device, really development, commercialization, and I would throw regulatory and quality expertise in there, right? But I feel like maybe I've kind of been missing the tools element. I think we're trying to build some of these tools, but like I think, hearing you talk through some of this stuff of like someone's got to do it and it hadn't been done, like, yeah, like, you look at I feel like you look at the activity and how fast every other week there's a new CRM being built, right? And it's like every however long in medtech, there's a new technology first solution for a big problem. You know what I'm saying? Like it's just rare, it feels like. It's like the focus is on the devices, right? The focus isn't on the things that help the operators do their stuff better. And frankly, like they're just left to use like whatever they can grab from other industry, which is not ideal. You know what I mean? Frankly, it's not ideal. So I'm curious, you've got a co-founder, correct?
Yeah, and Uma Iftikhar, he's, if I'm the beauty, he's the brains. He's kind of, working on all the technical side of things and the really fun stuff like document ingestion and parsing and all of the stuff that kind of makes this, I would say, kind of like AI native, in terms of our ecosystem. And he's kick-ass engineer, loads of experience, funnily enough, started off his career working at the UN. So is no stranger to sort of like challenging environments to kind of be a developer in. But then has also had that experience of working in consumer goods, consumer software side of things where, the pace of innovation and the push for, delightful moments and, really trying to get the most out of technology is essential. So I think in terms of like Venn diagram between the two of us, with my knowledge of med, also, I'm no stranger given my time at Meta to automation, AI and software development. I think it's kind of quite a good match. And we're slowly but surely building up a really strong team of advisors as well so that, we can augment our team's knowledge with expertise that you kind of can't just magic up overnight. So, we're hopefully by the time that this goes out, we'll be able to announce some of our advisors. We're just working with them.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I'm excited to see that list. Yeah, and I was going to ask like how, first off, your co-founder was supposed to come on. I think he's ill, right? Like he's under the weather or something. But I was going to pick his brain about some of the things around kind of sub-agent delegation. And I know there's like kind of the system for like sorting, tagging, and indexing to keep it fast, but also keep the context windows from blowing out for these individual functions. But I'll have to grab some time with him another time. But I was going to ask you, like, how are you guys thinking about your team as it stands now? And when I say team, like, not really advisors. I'm talking like whether it's part-time, fractional, or full-time people. Like, how are you guys thinking about your team and growth? I think, with AI agents and like you guys having the ability to orchestrate, no pun intended, these AI agents, like it, to me, fundamentally changes how you hire, how you plan to delegate work, and all that stuff. What are your thoughts? How are you guys thinking about team building in 2026 and beyond in this AI agent world?
Yeah, so I mean, I think realistically, if we were having this conversation even 18 months ago, the first hires that we'd be looking to make beyond myself and Uma would be probably extra eng capacity. But quite rapidly, I mean, I'm semi-technical. Like
there's no such thing as non-technical anymore, Rhys.
Yeah, well, yeah, no, exactly. But it's the sort of thing where, I'm able to kind of like put together an actual functional prototype, hand it off to Uma, and then he's able to productionize it and make it so that it's like industry standard. That is something that, typically you would have needed to hire a fractional or full-time designer, a fractional or full-time platform engineer, all of these sort of things that this is why, people would suddenly have to go and say, right, I need to raise a round to get to MVP. And, this is going to take me a couple of $100K minimum because I need all this expertise and extra people. Otherwise, it's going to take me 18 months to build an MVP. So really, I would say we're changing from kind of focusing on early tech hires. I mean, we are going to be expanding our tech team just so that, Uma can kind of focus on the thornier issues around things like going from unstructured to structured data. That's a deceptively challenging problem. But our team is probably going to expand in the regulatory affairs professionals, and just so that we can have that tight feedback loop internally to, iterate our product, make sure that, we're expanding into as many different regions and supporting into as many different jurisdictions as possible. So it's funny, a RegTech company typically would end up having the tech part as the primary thing and then build up the reg thing. Whereas, really we're going to be building up the reg team until basically we see what Uma's breaking point is.
Very well said on all that. The bottleneck is no longer being able to build it or the engineering, talent. The bottleneck is being able to know what to build, right? And I think, my view on a lot of this is like the product manager and the marketer and the engineer and the dev, et cetera, like those are all converging into one person that knows how to like really leverage AI agents and those types of skills. And it's funny, like we have almost like a similar setup to where, I've got really good domain expertise, and we do have a dev on our team who is like absolutely brilliant at, kind of high level abstraction of the architecture, what's required, how does it fit into like the security and safety protocols, and like what's the best way to do this, because there's 50 ways to do it and a lot of them are bad. Instead of just saying, hey, I want a feature that does this, right? Like I can go in there and like, really build out a really nice PRD for it, and then maybe even some components, React components or like diagrams, like, or if it, when it calls for it, if it makes sense, whatever, we've even got like a kind of like a cloned dev environment that doesn't like, I can't put any PR that I push is just going to that branch, right? But like I can basically have an entire dev environment of our like existing platforms, whether it's Medtech vendors or campaigns or our backline portal or whatever, where I can just like build stuff and like be like, hey, like this is what I think it needs to be, throw the PR, the pull request his way. He looks at the code and goes for it. And like, I will say this too, though, and I'm curious if you guys really quick, and then I'll let you jump in, but like, I've also found too, where it's like, I enjoy doing that stuff so much. It's fun that I almost have to like hold myself back and be like, look, just send him just create a linear task or linear issue with the PRD attached and go outreach, like, because I could just spend 3 hours in, with Claude Code and Cursor and like get something cool. But it's like, is he gonna be able to like actually use that code? Is he gonna have to untangle it? Like, is it? So we've had that conversation. I'm curious if you guys have too.
Yeah, I mean, I would sort of say that, the position of the challenge doesn't become, can you build it? It's should you build it? And this is where, back when I used to lecture students in product development and prototyping, and it was always a thing of, to actually communicate an idea, a prototype is the best way to kind of do that. Because even if we write with the best, most beautiful, detailed PRD, what you interpret versus what I interpret from that document is usually going to have a delta. And actually bringing it to life and putting it in someone's hands, so that you can go and say, oh, no, that bit, I didn't mean like that. That's invaluable. So that's where I'd sort of say that you're able to massively accelerate the, kind of internal feedback side of things. What I will say that is always a bit of a challenge, or at least we find as a bit of a challenge, is things like Claude Code, Lovable, etc. They are amazing tools, but they are kind of sometimes like the most eager intern that you've ever had on your team. And like, sometimes you'll be like, hey, I just want you to move this button. And it's like, yeah, I moved this button and then completely designed you a full new nav bar and this and that and that. And you then have to kind of be like, okay, buddy, like, great. I asked you to do this one thing. Let's go back to that. So sometimes I find that it's almost having the specificity, and also it's so easy for AI coding assistants and product development that, you just end up with like, oh, and another feature and another feature. And I think actually the craft and skill of saying, right, actually, let's par this right back. Like, what do we absolutely need, and what's feature creep or bloat or just stuff that like, just isn't adding good ROI. And that actually, I would say that used to be the thing where you always used to have to justify building something because eng time was so expensive. Whereas now, to that point of intentional friction, and friction not always being a bad thing, like we're seeing that where I think you're going to have lots of stuff being shipped and then unshipped. So I don't know. I think the challenge, as you sort of said, does become figuring out what to build rather than can you build it.
Totally agree. I mean, we think a lot about like how we can achieve the desired outcome because like most of what we're building these days is like user asks for it, user or client asks for it and we just ship it build it and ship it. It's like, but it's like even in that stuff, it's like how can we minimize the impact to the current thing both visually and structurally and still deliver the value that the user is seeking here. And I think like in medtech, especially when it's like you're dealing with a clientele, whether that's founders or reg quality people or CDMOs or whatever it is, that like are just not AI native people by nature, right? They're not like they're still using, paper-based systems, a lot of them, et cetera. Like keeping it simple and like the decluttering of your UI and like making sure that like when they're on a specific page, there's, maybe there's a lot of things they can do, but like the main thing they should be doing or their primary workflows are given visual hierarchy and space. And there's a guy and he's in the UK somewhere. I forget where he lives, but Dennis Leonard, he's in the EXO community as well, but he runs Creative Navy. You guys got to connect because he basically, they work mainly on devices, but all he does is like UI UX design for medtech and like medical products. And like his firm has done like Formula One stuff. They've done all kinds of crazy stuff. But, and they built I need to check on this because he said they were building it when we last talked, but like it was basically a objective scoring and analysis of like visual complexity of a user interface or a form or whatever. So you can basically just like throw your URL in or whatever, and basically it can give you like almost like an SEO score, I'm thinking almost, right? But like more visual. So anyways, I just thought that was really cool. So I wanted to mention that. Okay, I'm going to try to go like a little almost rapid fire here because I want to get through a couple things. But so say you're hiring, on this piece about the team and what work looks like, right? Like put yourself 2.5 years into the future. Do you see a version of work as it exists currently with like modest evolutions and shifts because the adoption curve, blah, blah, blah? Like, or do you think there will be in like 2.5 to 3 years, like a more fundamental structural or seismic change by that time?
I think that really we have to be aware, and especially with something like regulation, that understandably organizations like the FDA and notified bodies in the EU are understandably being cautious at how AI-enabled tech is being adopted into workflows. That's good. That's a great thing. I think oftentimes that'll be presented as like, oh God, they're anti-innovation, and they are not. It's just that when safety's on the line, it matters to get it right. The way in which I see things really changing would be more on the 5 to 10 years sort of landscape, where I imagine once we start having discussions around what does it mean to have human judgment and devolved responsibility. I think at the moment, our legal frameworks aren't quite set up to deal with this kind of murky ground where it's like what happens when human judgment is augmented or influenced. And I think that's the sort of legal system, much like the way that with self-driving cars, I think that's a really good parallel example. We need to kind of see how the legal side of things unlocks first. That will drive, and then once that changes, it'll be like penny falls, and then lots of things will suddenly all change all at once. That's the way I see it. But I think what I'm most excited of in the short term is I would love to kind of see AI specialist notified body. Like, what does it mean if your standard testing labs become like fully automated or semi-automated so that, you can suddenly request biocompatibility report and, basically it's turned around in a week or two, or I know we've had the conversation, where do you use like simulations or those side of things so that you can fail fast internally, low cost, and then by the time that you're sending things off for the slower processes, you basically are 95%, 99% sure that it's just basically a rubber stamping exercise at that point.
Yeah. As you were kind of talking through that, it was almost making me think like, when you're doing device development, you should pretty much know and have laid out like, okay, here's the sequence of steps, right? Like once we get these devices done and through the sterilization validation, then like, a certain subset of those samples are going to go to the, transit and ship testing and go do that. And maybe it's at a different facility. right? And then there's X, and then there's Y, and then there's stuff all the way leading up to that, like when first articles come off the tool, or so on and so forth. And it was just kind of making me think, you were talking about like an AI native like testing facility, but like as soon as those test reports are like saved in their system, right, and sent to you, or whatever linchpin point that you put in there, maybe it's you approving them or whatever, then there's like some almost like automatic, kind of communication to where, with the next person in that chain. And you've designed this workflow, right? But the agent is basically poking and prodding it along in real time. So like something happens on a Thursday and they put the report out at 3:30. By 3:35, like the next person in the chain has been notified that, hey, like we need to start executing on this plan, right? Where otherwise it's like, oh, well, I was at a conference and so, and we didn't get to it until the next, like I'm thinking there's interesting opportunities there.
And so the parallel that I'd use from a different industry. So I also worked in banking briefly. And like when you sort of look at the finance industry, at least within the UK, scale things back 20, 30 years, forgive me on the exact timelines, but it used to be very much a paper-based reconciliation, handing, sometimes literally manually copying data around, pushing it to the different parts of the bank. And what would be, say, a transfer of money would take, 3 to 5 working days minimum, because there was all of this bloat and process and human handoff and interchange happening. Whereas now, at least like with the UK's banking system, we have, automated a lot of that side of things, so that we have the open banking protocols, we have PSD2 and, all of these things which actually make it so that the interchange of money, you can send a bank transfer and it happen in like 30 seconds. I think people like on the banking side of things take it for granted how far things have actually changed. And that's where I'd sort of say, like, I would love to see things like Medtech and the processes with Medtech actually get towards that. And, granted, I'm not saying that, finance is perfect by a long way. I'm sure there's lots of people, I have quite a few friends who work in banking who tell me all the time that there are different ways that it's broken. But this is the sort of change that like it can happen, and it can happen in regulated, very critical, systems like financial systems. So why don't we make that happen here?
100%. And, I personally feel like if you look at a lot of the horror stories or bad actors or like incidents and whatever that have happened in medtech when patients have gotten hurt or there's class action suits or whatever, like that is like very rarely a breakdown in like the quality process or quality system or whatever. It's usually like malfeasance or negligence or bad actors or them like saying like, I don't care, let's ignore this. Let's just like see how much we can get out of the situation. Like, so I feel like if you look at the data and kind of like, I feel like we've got a very, very good system in place, and like making that more efficient and speeding it up and doing a lot of things that we're talking about, like you're still using the same underlying kind of safety frameworks. We're just like basically getting from touch point A to touch point B or milestone A to B faster and easier. But like nothing like underlying the safety protocols and stuff is like fundamentally changing, which I think is another thing that people like need to appreciate. Because like we've got a pretty good track record, and we're not really even saying we need to change that. It's just we just want to do it faster.
So just on that point, all I would say is like, and it comes back to this point of human judgment shouldn't be outsourced. Like we are a long way off that. But all of the steps in between, I think that's fair game.
No, well said. I've got a question about kind of the future of Orchestrate, like as kind of close it out. But before that, like I'm just curious, like if you're hiring and let's say it's a non-software dev role, right? Non-engineering role. So this could be sales, could be marketing, whatever. Like, are you guys at a point where you're kind of over-indexed enough where it's like, hey, like if you're not AI native, like it's going to be hard for us to hire you. You know what I mean? Are you guys at that point as an organization?
Yeah.
I feel like I kind of am.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I kind of hate like the narrative that is coming out where it's a sort of like, Gen Z are AI native, so they're only going to be the ones that can learn this stuff. And it's like, well, no, it's more about mindset, right? If someone comes to me and sort of says, hey, I've tried these tools, I've poked and prodded, I've got curiosity, I've got pragmatism, I can maybe have an intelligent discussion on like, actually, I found that this is where I'm comfortable using it and I can kind of trust it. And here are the areas that I just find that it's not to par. That's great. And I don't care whether you're an 18-year-old or an 80-year-old, like it doesn't matter. It's more that mindset side of things. Now, if someone came to me and was just like, hey, I've got my really, really fixed set ways of doing things, I think that would be where it'd be the thing of like, okay, well, what's your level of comfort to change? Because, we're a startup, we're having to, the whole AI narrative is really accelerated the pace of change, and that thing of, hey, what would have taken, what a timeline that would have been a week or 2 weeks, actually we are sort of maybe asking, okay, that's taking like 2 days. Why is that taking 2 days? That should be like, we flagged that this morning. Why am I not getting the output or the return on that within a matter of hours rather than days? And I think that's the core change, where it's like, and I would say to anyone listening to this podcast, whether it's as an entrepreneur or an operator, I would really be thinking about like figuring out what are those moments or those time sinks that cause like those days and timelines to build up, and figuring out like how you can use processes and tooling to condense that into, as rapid a time as you can.
Yeah. And I just want to like kind of double tap on the point you had about mindset, because it's so true. I've seen, mechanical or biomedical engineers that like every day they hold in their head systems and complexities and things that are just so much more nuanced and complicated than understanding like a database schema or like how to prompt engineer. It's a mindset thing. And I've had friends of mine that were like, I won't shut up about AI. And then all of a sudden they're like, start to get into it. And then one of them's like, I'm going to set up OpenClaw. I'm like, no, you're not. Don't do that yet. Right. But
Yeah.
I saw the mindset change, and he went from like, this stuff's kind of stupid, I don't know if I want to learn it, to like, oh my, this is going to be like a crazy, huge impact for me and my workflow and all that stuff. And like, almost like seeing the light, you know what I mean? And then like, you just want to keep engaging on it. So yeah. And I'm not saying I absolutely wouldn't hire someone, especially on the role, if they're not like fully AI native, but they need to be able to, in my view, it's a prerequisite. It's kind of like, do you, know how to use Microsoft, Word, PowerPoint, Excel? Like, do you know basic prompt engineering and right, that kind of stuff? But all right, last question, and then I'll kind of let you close it out. But you talked to us about the QMS that you guys are rolling out now.
Yeah.
What else is on the roadmap, right? Like, what else is on the roadmap? What's the future of Orchestrate look like?
So I think in terms of, near and far term, I think like what we're starting to explore is how we can meaningfully integrate and provide services like, localization. It's not unusual that we hear companies with 50 to 100K of budget for medical translation. That is just something that is baked in. And once again, it adds you have to raise an invoice, you have to get that approved, you have to, X, Y, Z, and all of a sudden, what should be a translation is actually a month-long horror project. Those are the sort of areas that really we're like looking into. And, we're especially focused on building our partnerships with, say, for example, distributors, local agents, all of these sort of things where I want us to kind of be able to have a network of people that we can sort of say, we can get you unlocked on the regulatory thing. And then the moment that you're ready to translate or to start finding your, like in the demo, a Saudi Arabian agent, like we can hand you off to that seamlessly and set you up with that. Why can we not do that? And I think that's what we keep coming back to, is like looking at more and more of the value chain and being like, at what point does our bound end, and at what point do we hand off to partners?
No, that's interesting. It's almost kind of like a version of like Medtech vendors. How, we're matching device teams with CDMOs, right? Like you've got companies coming out of your kind of coming out of the pipeline, or like in it, and saying like, hey, I'm gonna have regulatory clearance soon, and I need a distributor. And so like that kind of funnel of users already exists, but then like getting them matched and in front of to evaluate, engage, etc. Those distributors, you're thinking about it the exact right way. Like that's exactly what I would think. And but yeah, I do think though that could be a huge unlock, because like if I'm thinking about justifying it to a board, right? Like you've lowered the cost and you've lowered the timeline to be able to do this, right? So like now we have a huge impetus to be like, okay, what does it look like if we go into Korea, right? Or if we go into Brazil, or if we go into Japan? But then then the board member hat goes on, and you're like, who's going to sell it there? Right. Well, we need to have that teed up or whatever. So I think it's super, super smart that you guys are thinking about this. But Rhys, seriously, we could have gone for hours and hours on this. Like I this podcast is basically like an AI-Medtech podcast now, which I absolutely love. But I just want to say, I think it's so awesome the work that you guys are doing, the speed at which you're building and shipping, kind of the lens that you see Medtech through, and the need to compress these timelines and even refactor some of the development process. So like, love what you're doing. I'm one of your biggest fans, by the way. I'll turn it over to you kind of for like maybe closing statements here. Floor is yours. Anything you want to plug, shout outs you want to give, updates, anything you want right now.
Sweet. So thank you very much for having me on. The big thing that I would go and say is to anyone that's seeing this podcast or listening to this pod, like if you're in that stage of whether you're super early or maybe you're looking to expand regionally and, you've kind of got your registrations, come speak to us. We'd love to see what you're struggling with, how we can help you. And if we can, then great. If not, we'll do our best to point you in the right direction. But the main thing that I would say is like, we really see ourselves as playing a position of accelerating the ecosystem. So my email address is rhys@orchestrate.management. That's my personal email, my direct line. Reach out. Don't be a stranger. And we'd love to see how we can work with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's RHYS for the people that are just listening at home. But we'll have that. We'll have the Orchestrate.management website and your LinkedIn, how to get a hold of you. We'll put all of that in the show notes for people that are interested. And yeah, for everybody that stuck around for the full podcast, I know you got a lot out of this. I don't even have to wonder. I know you got a lot out of this just like I did. So really appreciate you sticking around and joining us for the full episode. And Rhys, thanks again for joining.
Thanks. Thank you.